Hi, we're joined today by Jamie Miller, author of American Speeches That Changed History, Voices That Shaped a Nation.
Hi, welcome to North of 48. It's November the 20th. It's 6 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 14 degrees Celsius up in northern Canada. And I'm joined by Jamie Miller, a political consultant out of Florida, the good old state of Florida. Hi, Jamie. How are you, sir?
I'm doing better than I deserve. It's a little chilly here in Sarasota as well. It got down to about 70 degrees.
Okay, you're killing me here, bro. You're killing me. Um, can you describe a little bit about yourself, Jamie?
Yeah,
What do you do?
I you know I tell people I was like when my dad had open heart surgery, he called the nurse over, and I'll make a long story short by just saying, here's my son Jamie. I don't know what he does, but he hasn't asked to borrow money in some time.
There
So,
you go.
so but I'm a political consultant, so I work with politicians, CEOs, um, big and small companies on things like reputation management. I work locally here in a government relations space for mostly a couple of nonprofits, our local hospital, just to make sure that the government environment is right for the goals that they want to meet. During my 30-year career, however, most people know me as uh, a campaign activist or political consultant. I've worked on everything from a rural bond issue for a hospital to build an emergency room, and to being a senior advisor to Newt Gingrich's presidential campaign here in Florida. So I kind of run the gamut. I'm a veteran of the Florida 2000 election, which some of your listeners may remember, or the recount, the hanging chads. And so for that election, I was director of grassroots. So mail-in ballots, poll watching, ballot integrity, door-to-door campaigns were all part of what me and my team did. And then following that, I was the executive director of the Republican Party of Florida.
Right on. Hey, if memory serves, there was a bunch of Republican grassroots members that stormed the building when they were counting the ballots. Were you involved with that?
That was in Miami. They called that the Brooks Brothers riot. I
Yeah.
think that's what they describe it on Wikipedia. I was not there. I was responsible. I was in Tallahassee at the headquarters with some people like Ted Olson, who recently passed and was the author of Bush v. Gore, the Bush portion of Bush v. Gore, and um, uh, Secretary Baker and Joe Albaugh. A lot of those folks were in the building there, as well was I. But yeah, that a lot of what we kind of saw a little bit in Pennsylvania going on here, where people just decided, oh, we're going to count ballots, even though we know they're illegal ballots. And I always tell people there's a difference between, a ballot does not become a vote unless it's legally cast. And so we saw in those three counties in Pennsylvania recently where they're trying to take illegal ballots and make them legally cast votes. And that was what was happening in Miami in 2000 when you saw the Brooks Brothers riot, so to
Right.
speak.
Just a fascinating time in history, and I don't know, Al Gore. He sure caved pretty quick. I think is some of the rhetoric about that, but however it goes. So I'm gonna
Well,
say,
37 days to cave, so it wasn't really fast, but it
okay,
was
good point. Good
it
point.
seemed like forever for me, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'll say so. Well, with my seeing Mr. Bush and Mr. Reagan photos in the back, I think we can see which way you lean politically, which is cool.
I
Um,
don't run from it. But I
nope,
I write a Substack called Reasonable Argument, so I try to think of myself as someone who's willing to have a positive public dialogue with anybody.
right. And which brings to the political environment today. So you're interested or have been a part of grassroots activists for voting and as well as for making some money for the hospitals and stuff like that, right? To help
Sure.
them out.
Yeah.
Um, what way does your grassroots have you noticed a difference in the people that you deal with during the last 10, 15 years
Well, the
of the
business has
electorate?
changed. the business has changed a great deal. In 2000, it was exclusively volunteers. 100% of the grassroots activists were volunteers who came to a headquarters, generally made phone calls, went door to door, and maybe did some mailings to, like absentee ballot voters or that sort of thing. That has evolved into a lot more of an app-based electronic or technical scenario where you use a lot more apps and text messages and things like that. 2020 and the pandemic certainly changed some of that, where people did not want to, people wouldn't come to their door, and they wouldn't talk to strangers at the door. You remember stories of people having laundry delivered, and they would put it in a special closet for 3 days to make sure the virus was dead before they would take the clothes out of that closet. And so it was a crazy time. So certainly people didn't like a whole lot of strangers at their door in 2020, and that really has kind of changed the way campaigning has worked. And so I think the Harris campaign here in the States decided that they were going to try to do it kind of the old-fashioned way and go door to door. And the Trump campaign kind of took a page out of Obama's book, it seemed, and decided to be much more technical about their grassroots activity and identifying people who were either likely to vote or were on their side, and trying to encourage them to vote through text messaging and other means.
Well, I see Mr. Trump changed his tune from the last election about mail-in ballots and voting early.
Yeah, and I always use the example of 2000 because so many people are familiar with it. And in 2000, there were 6 states, much like 1948 when Truman beat Dewey, right? There were 6 states that were separated by about 23,000 votes. Al Gore won 5 of those states. And one of the reasons why Florida was able to hold strong barely by its fingernails, 537 votes out of 6 million cast, was that we had an aggressive, at that time we called them absentee ballot campaigns, but it's very similar to the mail-in ballot campaigns of today. And George W. lost on election day, but we had banked a margin of 187,000 votes through that mail-in ballot campaign. And so that was certainly the difference in the race. And I'm very proud that that was my baby, so to speak. At the time, I was disappointed that we didn't hit 200,000, and I figured, I thought I was a colossal failure. And while all the George W. folks really said that they would have appreciated a 200,000 vote absentee ballot victory, but they certainly appreciated that it wasn't 186,000.
Well said. Well said. Well, there's a lot of Canadians that go down to Florida. And so
we love them. Come on down. It's beautiful.
I'm sorry for that. I know Alex Lifeson from Rush got beaten up in a nightclub while trying to protect his son. That's a story a lot of Canadians know about. I don't know if many Americans know about, but
where was that at?
I think it was in Miami. I believe it was at a nightclub, and he was protecting his son, who was maybe a little mouthy from one of the bouncers.
Certainly that I've been guilty of getting a little mouthy in nightclubs as well. So I'm just fortunate that it didn't end up like that. I'm on the west coast of Florida in Sarasota, so we're the sunset side of the coast, and Miami is the sunrise. So in Miami they stay up to sunrise. We take a bottle of wine to the beach, watch the sunset, and then go to bed.
So does that mean you're close to Tampa then?
Yeah, it is. About 45 minutes south. Yes.
Tampa Bay Lightning hockey team then. So did that tick you off that Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup last year? I'm not even sure they did. But
it's interesting because I love hockey, but I would not be considered a hockey fan. I'm still more of a baseball, bread and butter, and then football, and then hockey. But they are certainly, I go to at least a game a year. Normally I don't have season tickets, but I'll go to 1 or 2 games per year, and it's the passion around a National Hockey League game is incredible.
Right. Yeah, it is. I can't even really afford too many games here in my
And right
hometown.
here, we also have the Toronto Blue Jays just right up the street,
You
about 40
betcha.
miles, do have their spring training in Dunedin. So I've been in their stadium and certainly love having them here in Florida as well.
Right, and the Futures Expos franchise, is it Florida, the Marlins? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't, there's always that speculation between now, the Rays Stadium was damaged in the hurricane and it won't be fixed until 2027 probably, and they're supposed to have a new stadium in 2028. So there's a big controversy here. Next year, the Rays are going to play in Tampa on across the bay, where the Yankees have their spring training. So, it'll be interesting because there's only 11,000 seats there. And so, even everybody talks about how low the Rays attendance is. The average attendance is about 14,000. So we should be able to sell out the Yankee Stadium, the little Yankee spring training stadium for every game. And so the tickets that your friends and neighbors are used to buying and seeing their favorite Canadian teams here in Tampa might be a little bit more expensive this year just because there's going to be fewer of them.
Well, I hear you. I hear you on that. 11,000. Wow. It'd be like the Toronto Blue Jays back in the COVID era where they couldn't come back to Canada without quarantining for 2 weeks, so they stayed down there. And I think they
Uh,
played out of Dunedin too.
yeah, but you weren't allowed to go see them.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Put a picture in the stands. So, okay, through your years, you've seen the ebbs and the flows of the Democrats and the Republicans. Maybe so is Florida strictly a two-party state, or do the Greens or anybody else have a
We
foothold in Florida?
No, Democrats barely have a foothold.
Yeah.
We've had the majority of our state cabinet and a majority in the state house and Senate since 1998 as Republicans. Through that time, we've had two different Democrats win statewide who served on the Florida cabinet, and then they both served one term and then were defeated. And in the last two elections, Ron DeSantis won by 19 points and then Donald Trump won by 14. So I always say there's always a cautionary tale in there because, I look at a Republican who won statewide in 1990, and Democrats had about the same registration advantage in 1990 as Republicans have today. And the formula for Democrats is, and I don't think I'm letting any big secrets out of the bag here, because it's just math, is that, if Democrats don't have primaries and Republicans do, then if they have a good candidate, then that's the win possibility for them in a statewide race. And 2026, our governor and two out of the three cabinet positions will certainly be open due to term limits here in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily a ripe environment for Democrats, but under the correct circumstances, it could become a competitive environment for Democrats for sure.
Okay. Well, that's pretty good to know. Do you think your theory of the case with Kamala? I keep calling her Camilla. I don't know
I
why.
say Kamala, but I'm sure it doesn't roll right off the Southern tongue, I guess. So I don't. I
Or
never
the
mean to
northern
offend
one.
anyone. I never mean to offend anyone ever, and I certainly have an irrational fear of calling people by the wrong name. So I call her Vice President Harris.
I think that's smart, and actually, a couple of podcasters I know do the same. Like David Feldman, he calls her Vice President Harris. Do you think because she was not in a uh, uh,
Primary.
primary, do you think that hurt her during this election?
With I think it hurt her in the way that she never formulated a message of, even if I'm working with a county commission candidate, the three questions you have to answer is who you are, what you're going to do, and why you're qualified to do it. And she never really made that sale to the American people. She kind of ran a campaign based on gender, race, and hatred of Donald Trump. And while that certainly got her close, it wasn't close enough. I don't think and at the end, even though even a week before let's say 10 days before the election, she, or surrogates were calling Trump supporters Nazis, dumb, you know, weirdos, go down the list of name calling that was done by either Harris, the president, people like Mark Cuban, major personalities within as formal surrogates. These weren't just people saying, "Oh, I'm," just spouting off at the mouth. These are people who were welcomed into her campaign to speak on her behalf. And and then in the last 72 hours, she's like, "Oh, I'm the person who can unify the country." And people just didn't buy it. And it was the exact game plan that Biden implemented in 2020. The difference is Biden had 40 years of friendships and colleagues and a foundation of a political career on which he stood. And Harris really did not. She kind of went pretty quickly from California to the Senate to the vice presidency. And so she didn't have all those friends who are like, yeah, I don't know if I like Biden or whatever, but he's been good to me or he helped me with this or that throughout the years. And she just had not built those types of relationships and credibility, in my opinion.
Couldn't you say the same about Trump, though, that his electioneering was about the same as well, calling people out, a little bit of maybe hate to some social class.
So I certainly see where people could say that they ran similar campaigns in that way. But I think the difference is Trump had 4 years as president, and for 3 of those 4 years before an international pandemic, things were going pretty well. And people would say, and one of the things that I said during the campaign is most bipartisan economists would say, if you want to be intellectually honest, you want to look at, economic figures from February of 2020, not January 2021, if you want to compare the two presidencies. And while that didn't become part of the national fiber of the campaign or fabric of the campaign, I think that it became part of the DNA of what people were thinking. They knew that during those first 3 years of the Trump years, they had a pretty good economy. And in some cases, I would argue that if you were under the age of 30 or 35, it was the first time in your adult life that you felt a good, strong American economy. Because Obama's economic years, while he never faced, quote, a recession, he didn't really have economic policy. He implemented monetary policy to keep interest rates and things. So that we had this very slow growth during Obama's years. And then, of course, we had the inflation of Joe Biden because of his horrible energy policies that just created an environment where gas skyrocketed and food skyrocketed, and which then caused all goods and services to skyrocket,
Well,
up to nine.
Is it fair to place that on Biden because of the war?
100%. Yeah,
Really?
100%.
Because you
Well,
guys
he's the one who
you're still pumping out oil out of America. So
Well, he's the one who reversed the energy policy. He's the one who, he's the one who said we are mandating all electric vehicles by 2032, which in some place like Florida is just not rational. It's not even close to being feasible if you're in a situation where you have to evacuate for a hurricane. If you look at Miami, Palm Beach, and Fort Lauderdale, 3 of Florida's largest counties in Southeast Florida, those 3 counties are the population of Maryland, and which Maryland's about the 10th most populated state in the union. So those 3 counties are the size of the 10th largest state. And so, if you have to evacuate those 10 million people, and let's even say 2.5 million electric cars, they get as far as Disney World in Central Florida before you have to charge 2.5 million cars. And that's assuming that you're able to drive at 55 miles an hour or so, not the 2 or 3 miles an hour that people would be if they clogged the highways. And so there's in Sarasota, we're hit by Milton. The eye of Milton came within about a mile of my home, the technical eye. We were in the eye of the storm for 45 minutes, and we lost about a dozen houses on Siesta Key, not to flooding, but the garages flooded. Or in a lot of these places, the garages are underneath the house, right? The garage is ground floor, and then the house is above. and people left their electric cars, and the cars caught on fire and burned the house down. And so it's just not, if people want electric cars, I think the market should allow,
Mhm.
allow them to buy them, and let the market decide what the cost is, and they shouldn't get government subsidies for buying them. But it certainly shouldn't be mandated that in just, 8 short years, 100% of the cars that are sold have to be electric, because there's some parts of the country where it's just not feasible to have them.
Well, that's also a discussion going on in Canada. I work up in the Yukon, and we were trying to figure that out too. When it gets -40, -50 degrees Celsius, or -40 Fahrenheit as well, can you drive an electric car out there and get out? So we've settled on it have to be a hybrid where you can put fuel in it as well. Which brings me to Elon Musk being an advisor to Trump. I see Trump was against these EVs, these electric vehicles. Uh, do you think he's going to swing towards it now as a result?
I don't.
Is it going to
I
be
think you're going to see. I think you're going to see him reverse Biden's executive order for sure.
okay?
Now is he going to? Are there a certain level of government vehicles that are going to be electric? Probably, just because there are cases where they make a lot of sense, and it's but I've written in my Substack that it's these electric batteries are likely to be the nuclear waste of the 2030s. Because we're going to have to decide, while they say, oh, by then we're going to be able to recycle them. Well, we can't yet. And so,
Mhm.
what are we going to do with all these batteries when they go dead? And and we have a heck of a time trying to figure out. We had set up Yucca Mountain in Nevada to be, the nuclear storage facility, and of course, people moved next to Yucca Mountain, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. But they moved next to it, and they're like, "Well, I don't want nuclear waste in my backyard, right?"
Mhm.
And so now it's like, okay, what do we do with that? I think for sure, the one thing that we know is, because of electric vehicles, even if you don't mandate it, and because of AI, we have to increase the availability of electricity by about 30% in the next 4 to 5 years, not 4 to 5 decades. 4 to 5 years, we have to produce and distribute 30% more electricity than we are today due to AI and electric vehicles. And so I think you're going to have to see major concessions by people who, want to say, oh, we're not going to have coal-powered electric plants, or, we can have natural gas, or, I've always been a supporter of nuclear plants if, we can do them safely. And we certainly had decades of having them safe. After, I think, 3 Mile Island was the last kind of situation in the States for sure.
And I remember 3 Mile Island vividly, and I guess Microsoft is trying to get permission to restart it. Was
I
my
have not heard
understanding.
that, but it wouldn't surprise me, because we're going to have to look at, in Florida, everyone's like, well, why don't you just go to solar? And we have fields and fields and fields of solar panels, acres and acres. And, I think if my numbers, if I remember correctly, you need about 100 acres of these things to power 4 houses. Like it's not quite there. It's like it's the same thing with the windmills. There's a negative impact to birds with these windmills. There's a negative impact to migratory patterns. So that there's never a for sure that nuclear is not the only one that has a potential negative impact. All of it, has a potential negative impact. And so I don't think anyone's going to say, hey, we're going to turn out our lights, so we're going to continue to consume electricity.
Mhm.
And so if we're going to do that, how do we do it in the safest way possible, but while meeting this extremely increasing demand over the next 3 to 5 years, because that's coming. Everybody's using more AI, everybody's using more electric vehicles, and those are the two major driving forces.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's a good point. But there's a couple of European countries who are using their windmills and solar farms, and they've generated days where they never touched coal or oil. were nuclear power. So the science seems to be a little bit away yet to do this.
Well, and I don't know which countries you're talking, speaking
Britain
about.
actually had a day where they had like 99%
Sustainable.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I think it all has to be part of it, right? I'm not saying that we shouldn't study it, we shouldn't,
Yeah,
continue to develop it. It's not going to be there fast enough for the demand that AI and electric vehicles are going to create.
that's true. Yeah, and even Germany's talking about putting their nuclear factories back to work as well. I don't know what'll happen there, but we'll see. I know by 2035, you're not allowed a gas car in Berlin, I think, downtown. It's kind of going to be like LA, right? The car capital of the world, all going electric in California, or at least pushing for it.
They do like them out there, but there's also negative impacts, because now you have to put more, you have to make your roads stronger because these vehicles are heavier. You have to rebuild parking in Chicago. I know they had to rebuild parking garages because too many tenants had electric vehicles, and you just don't realize how heavy, one car is not too heavy, but when you start parking 400 and 500 of them in the same
Mhm.
parking garage, they're not built for that weight. Right. And so there's these unintended consequences that people really didn't think it through before they mandated it on everyone.
I hear you on that. In Vancouver Island, they had a major windstorm, and there's hundreds of thousands of people without electricity right now. So, I mean, it would be great to not pollute the environment and everything, but I think the science, I kind of agree with you. The science is not all there. And I'm a tree hugger, but I'll cut down a tree. So,
Yeah, I'm I had to cut down 9 oak trees around my house before Ian came, and I mourned every single one of them,
mm,
but I replanted other trees that were farther away from the house and safer in storms and things like that, right? So, it's I agree with you. I consider myself a conservationist. In Florida, because we're so Republican, everybody thinks, "Oh, you're anti-environment." I was like, our entire economy is based on the environment. Our entire economy is based on clean water and clean beaches. If we don't have clean water and clean beaches, you guys go somewhere else, right? Everybody goes somewhere else. There's beaches all over the world that people can go to,
right.
and the reason why they come here is because we have some of the cleanest water and cleanest beaches in the world. And so of course there's an economic reason for us to be conservationists, not only because we care and love our state, but because it makes economic sense for us as well.
Right. Can I ask you about FEMA and up in North Carolina,
Yeah.
Appalachian Mountains? I mean,
Mhm.
I was reading about that and being up in Canada. I was just amazed at the discourse with that. FEMA, I mean, there were literally people with guns keeping FEMA out of areas, and I'm sure FEMA did a lot of mistakes too in with the people there. What are your thoughts on what happened up there?
I don't know that I've seen the guns, but I don't doubt that your reports are accurate. The
It's
um,
just Newsweek and Time, right?
Well, if that's where you saw it, I didn't see it. So it's, I can't consume every piece of news, but I'm not denying the accuracy of what you're saying. I'm just not familiar with the exact news story. But the certainly we know that this part of this election cycle was Americans saying, we distrust our government. And, Americans have a long, long history of distrusting government. And so but I think part of it was political prosecutions of Donald Trump. I think you're seeing that with the attorney general pick with Matt Gaetz, where he was investigated for 3 years by the Department of Justice, and they chose not to indict him. And yet here they have some salacious material that they want to throw out to the gossip pages to ruin his nomination for attorney general. And
Well,
so I think Americans said we don't want, number one, I think Americans said, we're the jury, and President Trump, you're not guilty of any of these things. They were political prosecutions. We don't believe you. Like, we simply didn't believe this prosecutor in New York. We didn't believe the Department of Justice, and we didn't believe the U.S. House of Representatives when they impeached the president. And I think that's one big takeaway that especially people who aren't in the United States can take from this election, is that, Americans have the ability, and many other countries do too, where we can say to one political party or the other, if you go too far off the reservation, and they certainly did with lawfare, they did with DEI and boys and girls bathrooms and our southern border. You can go down the list of things where Democrats went too far, and Americans said enough is enough. Like, we're not going to put up with this craziness anymore, and we want some level of just normalcy. And so I like to use the word cautionary tale. The cautionary tale for Trump and his administration is, there's a fine line between, investigating these things and trying to get to the truth and for historical purposes and all those things, and that fine line of retribution. I don't think Americans signed up and said, we are against Democrats using government as lawfare, but we want Republicans to do it, right? So, I think that, and that's kind of the balance I think the Trump administration is going to have to try to find, especially right out of the gate, where, I look at Nancy Pelosi, and it looked, I think the American people said these were political impeachments, and we don't believe you. And so should Nancy Pelosi be investigated? Maybe. Is it going to be a huge distraction to the Trump administration? Certainly it will. And so, I think Donald Trump and the Trump administration has to decide how much of a distraction are we willing to have that's not going to help us meet our agenda to, have kind of these investigations and things. And I think part of it is, President Trump feels like history deserves an answer, right? And he wants history to exonerate him. And my belief is we, the people, exonerated him. And I don't know that he even needs it. I don't know that he needs a special investigation to say that these people did these things to us, because Americans already believe that politicians had political impeachments and political prosecutions, and so we just I don't know that it's necessary for him to achieve his goals.
Right, and with Trump having the three parts of the legislature, it'd be easier. But I have to just push back a little. During Trump's term, it was the same. There was a lot of litigious. Like a lot of stuff in the House. They were taking people to court and stuff. Is this not a game between the Republicans and the Democrats where they, I didn't like that guy. Let's bring him in.
Serious. It's a little bit more serious than a game, but I don't know that your analysis is far off. I think that one thing that we saw differently in Donald Trump in this campaign, which may or may not transfer to his administration, but certainly in this campaign, one thing that was different from him than the past, I like to say that some politicians govern by subtraction. If you go against me, you're out, sliced out, right? And there's other politicians like Bill Clinton, come one, come all, right? They practice the politics of addition. Yeah. And so Donald Trump in the past practiced the politics of subtraction. But during this campaign, he practiced the politics of addition. Robert Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, go down the list of people who he brought into his inner circle and helped him win this election. And Elon Musk and, people who he maybe wouldn't have trusted in the past, or maybe he wouldn't have, maybe he would have sliced out of his inner circle quicker than he did in the past. And so, my hope is that he continues to practice the politics of addition.
Well, now you've got Dr. Oz going to take care of your Medicare and the health services for every American. So, okay. I hope that works out for you.
I know Dr. Oz is a TV personality. I didn't really follow his Senate run that closely to know where he stands on issues.
That's where I learned the word charcuterie. Was from Dr. Oz.
Okay.
Yeah, we just call it a platter up here, right?
Yeah, that's what you're my kind of people.
Yeah. Slice a
I
little bit,
don't.
throw some veggies on it. It's a platter. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. I like
That's,
it.
um, that is amazing, that he did bring Tulsi in, and you got Elon. However, didn't Gates call him Hitler or some? He was really really hard on Trump for a while. Was it Gates or was it Vance? One of the two. But he's got my
I
point.
don't think it was. I don't think it was Gates. Gates has been a long-term supporter of Trump. It could have been J.D. Vance. I don't know that he used the word Hitler, but he may have.
Right.
But that's the difference. Marco Rubio ran against Trump,
I
and now
know.
now he's the
That's
Secretary of State. So
little Marco.
yeah, right. And so that's a perfect example of me suggesting that Donald Trump is practicing the politics of addition. And I see
Mhm.
that as a positive thing for all Americans and those who watch American politics and are concerned about it.
Right. Well, fair enough. With my interview with Chloe, who was a Democratic activist, I mentioned, and I'll mention it to you, that anytime you guys get crazy down there, it comes up north. And we have
We
an
should-
election next year, so I'm kind of curious what's going to happen.
They're always fun to watch. So if I have bag will travel. So as a political consultant, I'm happy to come up and help good candidates.
Well, I think it's about 20 years now where I've been deeply involved in American politics, to the
Mhm.
point where it's like a soap opera. And I'm actually glad there's some silence and some peace right now, um, on the internet. Well, somewhat. Darn it. What do you think, this administration with Trump? Do you think he's going to do some good things for the American
You
people?
know,
Is the world safe? Can I ask you that?
Well, the world was safer during his 4 years of a presidency outside that pandemic than it had been in some time or has been since. And so, if history is our guide, that we will be safer with Trump as president than we would have been with Harris. Now, that's also suggesting that all these things happen in a vacuum and are going to repeat themselves, and we know that's not the case, right? So, um, we I think that we are better off with Trump and I think people can, trust that. The big concern for international viewers of American politics are, tariffs and the wars, right? That's the things that they seem to be most concerned with, and people ask me, like, well, is he going to go through with tariffs? I don't know. Like, if I'm going to be intellectually honest, I don't know. The truth of the matter is, I think he's going to balance some of that. He's not going to allow Chinese electric vehicles manufactured in Mexico to come across our border without tariffs. That much I can tell you. And so he's going to. I think it'll be pinpointed on certain things that he sees as specific threats to either our manufacturing or economy or national security. I think he'll tackle those things first. I recently had an interview on the BBC, and they were very concerned about the war in Ukraine and Marco Rubio's appointment to Secretary of State. And I've known Marco for more than 2 decades as a friend and as a colleague, and he is there's no greater American we can have in that role because his parents faced and fled a communist regime. He was born here in the United States. His parents were blue collar. He had the same experience that many of us grew up with, or the vast majority of Americans face with, when he first was elected to the state house, he was $250,000 in debt with student loan debt. And, so that was his net worth was 250,000. And on his you have to file these forms to say your net worth in Florida,
Hmm.
and he put that his net worth was zero. And a reporter thought, well, I've got him, right? I've got Marco Rubio. He lied on his form. And they said, well, Marco, why'd you put zero as your net worth when you're $250,000 in debt? And he just smiled and said, I refuse to believe a human being is worth less than zero.
Yeah.
And so
Oh, that's good. That
so
was
he
good.
has so he has a sense of humor, but he also knows how to disarm through that humor. And, I think people, as they get to know Marco, will realize that number one, he is a serious foreign policy expert. He is serious about the freedoms that America provides, not only its citizens, but the rest of the world.
Mhm.
And when you look at things specifically like Ukraine, I think the first order of business is to ensure there's not escalation. 3 weeks ago, North Korea sent 10,000 troops to Ukraine on
Rumors
behalf
are
of
there's going to
Putin,
be 100,000. Yeah.
and it was barely reported here in the mainstream media. Podcasts, we're talking about it, Twitter, but not your major media outlets. And so I think the very first order of business is to make sure that doesn't escalate. And then I think it's kind of to try to negotiate whatever peace we can get there. And certainly in Israel, I think you're going to see a more pro-Israel administration, or at least Israel, you can go do what you want without us looking over your shoulder and condemning you every step of the way for protecting your sovereign land. And so I think those are probably the first two biggies as far as foreign policy go that your listeners and viewers may be interested in.
Well, coming from a Ukrainian Polish community up in northern Canada, we've been watching the Ukraine war. I've had some activists on the podcast and some Russians as well. Um, what like Ukraine's in a hard spot right now. I think Zelensky's doing everything right with Trump, with the words he's saying. Do you think Ukraine will still get some support from the United States like they are now? Or do you think that's going to go
I don't
down, or you
think
can't
I don't
answer?
Well, I'm not a surrogate for anybody, so I'm
Right.
just a U.S. citizen on your show. So I'm not privy to international secrets. So what I
Well, that's
suggest
why I
is,
brought you on. I want you to
yeah,
spill the secrets, my friend.
so I have opinions, right? So
Right.
I don't have, so what I share is certainly not the United States' foreign policy,
Right.
but I don't think the international community is going to allow a hands-off approach and allow Russia to overrun Ukraine. And
Fair said.
I think Donald Trump's approach is, hey, many hands make light lifting,
Hmm.
and we need more people at the table. And this isn't just the United States who should be over here doing that. And I know there's others who are involved as well, but I think from an American viewpoint, if you were to ask Americans if other people are involved, it's certainly the perception here that we're the ones funding the whole Ukraine operation. And whether that's true or not, that's I'm just suggesting that that's the perception here.
Hmm.
And um, and so I think from a political standpoint, Donald Trump is going to have to go say some things that may already be true just to get Americans to know that they're true.
Yeah.
And he does that, and he does it expertly. And if you're against Donald Trump, you're like, oh, this is crazy political rhetoric,
Hmm.
but he does it in a way that kind of, I say that, Americans elected Donald Trump because he leads us through fire, and we were willing to look past the fire he sets. And
That's well said. Well said.
and so, because I don't think there's a truer way to look at it. Like, we all know he sets fires. He does.
Mhm.
Everybody wakes up like, oh, what's he going to say today? But the truth of the matter is, he is his own kind of entity that even if he happens to set the fire, people feel confident being behind him and that he's going to lead us through. And certainly he's capable of leading us through the fires that others set. So we're just, quite frankly, I think we reelect him because we were willing to accept that,
Mhm.
that sometimes he's going to say things that are not politically correct, or the rhetoric is a little stronger than what we all like to hear. But it's the beat of his drum, and it works for him. It worked for him in the past, and I think Americans reelected him because they expect it to work in the future.
Well, no, that's well said. Fair said. Is there anything that you can advise for Democrats or Democrat grassroots in Florida, besides telling them to stay home?
No, vote in December, right? That's the best advice.
Yeah, that's
Um, and so the I think all these things swing back and forth,
right.
right? And so I think one of the things that people said in this election is Democrats went too far. And does that mean Democrats have to now become Republicans? No. I always say somebody asked me election day, it's like, well, what do you think about the election? I was like, I don't know. I think everything's trending towards a Trump win, but you don't know until they're counted. And they're like, well, oh, is your business going to tank if, Harris wins? And I'm like, I usually have a pretty good business, supporting the people who are in my party, or I have a pretty good business being the loyal opposition.
Hmm.
And there's a fine line between being the loyal opposition and just hatred and division. And so I'd like to see Democrats, if they're willing to accept some advice, is come back and be the loyal opposition. And every single thing doesn't have to be World War III. So like I said, my blog is Reasonable Arguments. I reach out to shows like yours because I feel like it's my small part of trying to, whether I think you and I started this conversation before the election, so I was willing to come on your show, win or lose, right? And so, and I just feel like these conversations are helpful. And the more we have them and the more we can look each other in the eye, even if it's over Zoom, and say, hey, we may disagree on this, right? The energy policy that I spouted is wrong. You believe something different. That's okay. People have a different vote. They have a different voice. They have different experiences. And it's okay for us to disagree, but we need to try to get past kind of the social media anger and the drama of getting hits for, oh, Donald Trump won, and I'm going to film myself crying and losing my mind, and just so I get views on TikTok. And and I'm going to say these outrageous things because I just want to see social media views. And maybe, listen, if that's somebody's business model, fine, but let's not look towards those people for political advice. Let's start, recognizing, not The View, not MSNBC as the arbiters of everything that's correct on the left. There's some people out there who are, like me. They're gonna, I'm right of center. There are folks who are left of center where I've sat down and had great conversations with, and many podcasters, and I've appeared on about 42 different shows between August 1st and Election Day, and probably 20% of those were more progressive or left-leaning versus right-leaning. And the conversations I had with each and every one of them was just as reasonable and professional as the one that you and I are having right now. And so in that regard, it gives me much hope that we can return to a place where we don't have to agree, but we have to quit saying, because we disagree, I'm never going to talk to you again. I'm, not only am I never going to talk to you again, I'm going to try to destroy you. I'm going to just try to destroy you personally, politically, professionally. I'm just going to try to do anything I can to, knock the feet out from underneath you. And those types of activities need to stop. And, both sides are guilty of it. I'm not saying that one side's done it and the other hasn't. And it started probably, if you want to get back to the root of it, it started, I think, probably with, you could probably go back to Nixon, but it probably started with Robert Bork being denied a seat on the U.S. Supreme Court by Joe Biden and other Democrats, when you had somebody who was denied a seat on the U.S. Supreme Court simply because of their political views. And, so that was, I think, wrong, and it sowed the seeds of what we've kind of seen today. The other is, this is kind of getting in the weeds a little bit, but I think it was 2003, the U.S. Supreme Court had a case called the Citizens United case.
Yes, I remember this. Yeah.
So what the case said was that corporations are now recognized as people, basically, and they can have the same political activity as people. And that case started because Republicans wanted to take the political voice away from unions. And the US Supreme Court said, well, we're not going to do that, but we will give a voice to corporations. And it sounds great, right? Like it sounds like a great idea. But what the unintended consequence of that is each and every politician has become their own political party. So since 2003, we've seen the erosion of the infrastructure of political parties. And if you were to poll that in the United States, it'd probably poll as 85%. We should destroy the political parties, right? But the one thing the political parties did was it required people to work together. It required different groups. For forever, it would be, if you were from a southern state, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, when something came out and it was regional, it was southern, you voted with your state Democrats before you would vote with a liberal Republican from New York, and that's gone by the wayside, so and I'm not saying that regionalism is better than political divides, but you had more of a, hey, let's work across the aisle type of idea versus, it's my way or the highway. And one of the reasons why is because every single politician, if you have a billionaire behind you, supporting you, every single politician has their own political committee, which is basically their own personal political party. And so as long as I'm talking the language of that one donor or my three major donors or whatever that is, half a dozen major donors, then you're able to be viable as a politician. Where before all that money had to come through the party, it was kind of, collectively like, hey, this is what we're going to do as a party. That's what they're going to do as a party. And we would, sometimes people would be like, okay, well, I'm not with the party on this. And this folks would be like, Democrats would say, I'm not with my party on this. So then these folks get together and maybe they become the majority over a particular issue. Right. More in the middle. And that type of environment doesn't exist right now in American politics.
Wasn't Bush and Kerry, wasn't that government funded where you got so much money if you both agree to it? I know Jimmy Carter's was before all this money flooded into the political discourse, which is kind of made it hard to parse who's right. Vice President Harris blew through billions of dollars, and she's $20 million in debt right now. Donald Trump, the same. There was a lot of money spent on this campaign. And
yeah, I was looking at the Federal Election Commission report. It's so much worse than that. Like, it's something, and I wish I had it up. And but I want to say between political committees, PACs, and campaigns are the least of the spenders.
Right.
And so where the two campaigns spent $2 to $3 billion together, political committees spent about 20.
Right.
And so the campaigns, when you start thinking, and this is my point, so you had campaigns spend about 15% of the money spent. And now you're like, okay, well, I've been part of campaigns where I've had a candidate, let's say, raise $100,000 and we're doing what we need to do. And then somebody may even come in to help us with $500,000 that I don't even know about. And it's just like, oh, now mail and TV is running. And I, as a consultant for a candidate, I've lost control of the message because I only have 20% of the money. And this other group, this third party group, has 5 times the money and is helping, but sometimes it's not, just simply because they're not on message with, the overall plan for the campaign. So it becomes, I've been an advocate from probably the late 80s or early 90s that political candidates should be able to take as much money from anybody who's willing to give it, as long as they report it directly to their campaign. So if you want Microsoft to take a $3 million check from Microsoft and you're willing to stand in front of your constituents and explain to them why Microsoft is, giving you $3 million and your constituents accept it, fine. But what we need to get rid of is all these shadow groups where Microsoft is spending $1 million here, that gets moved there, that gets moved there. And then by the time it shows up on television or people's mailboxes, you don't even know that it's Microsoft that spent that money.
That's a fair point. I'd hate to be the Microsoft candidate if I was running anywhere. But
Not if they gave
yeah,
you $3 million.
well, yeah. I That's what I liked about Bernie Sanders' campaign. He just asked people to look in the cushion for his change and send it in. And he was very prolific in fundraising, was he not?
Bernie
During the
was, and
Yeah,
I still think that if they had not, Donna Brazile had not put her finger on the scale, Bernie Sanders probably would have been the nominee in 2016, and we could have seen a different outcome then. I don't think America would have liked the results of a Bernie Sanders presidency, but Democrats have now had, three elections, presidential elections in a row, where they have not allowed Democrat primary voters to weigh in at all for the
that's
most
good.
part.
That's a good point. For Bernie's sake, though, he seemed to have a lot of attention from Trump voters too. The
Well,
same part of blue collar and young men.
he certainly had the people who, and this is something that I probably didn't realize was as important as it turned out to be. But Robert Kennedy Jr. brought whatever Bernie's supporters were in the Democratic Party over to Trump. And, I think that the Bernie supporters and those independent, maybe independent Bernie supporters, maybe not Democrat
Yeah,
Bernie supporters, but
I think that's a good. Yeah.
independent Bernie supporters were followed Kennedy to Trump. And, it was something that I thought, okay, well, you'd always rather have somebody's endorsement than not, but it turned out to be much more important in the final results in the campaign than what I would have predicted.
Right, and he's been nominated to be your is it the FDA or the food? No, the Food and
Health and Human Services, I think.
Health and Human Services. So that is going to be quite interesting. Former Democrat like Trump was, now a Republican member of the Congress, I guess, or of Trump's cabinet.
Yes.
Is there anything you would like to leave the people before we disengage here, my friend?
No, I just, to people who supported the other side, I always encouraged that, and I start every election day on Facebook since Facebook has been around by saying the election day morning, we collectively as American people are stronger than any one person, even if that person's president of the United States. And so, regardless of who wins or loses this election, if they get too far off the reservation, we still retain our power as citizens to correct it. And I think that's what happened a little bit with this election. Certainly, as a general rule, we've fixed those things through elections, and in 2 years we'll have another one. And Trump will either be, people will either support Trump candidates or not. And so, probably depending on how well he does in these first 2 years.
So you don't think he's gonna try to break the Congress and run for a third term then, right? I mean,
I
that
think
was
he'd have
that was
to.
part of the rumor out there, but no,
Well, I think he'd have to get a
ridiculous.
constitutional amendment. We haven't had one of those in some time.
Yeah, in some time. Do you have where can people follow you,
So
Jamie?
you can follow me in on Substack at Reasonable Arguments. That's also YouTube at Reasonable Arguments. And everywhere else, Rep Jam, REP, like Republican, JAM, like James Andrew Miller, 6 letters, Rep Jam.
Okay.
So if you Google or whatever search engine you like, you put in one of those two things, you're likely to find me.
We'll put it in the show notes. What's your Blue Sky handle? You got
I did sign up for Blue Sky. I haven't done anything with it, but I went and got it just because I was like, okay, well, enough people are going over there, and I
Mhm.
dabble with most social media as they come along, and like most of them, like Threads, I joined, and then I really, it's just like Twitter, Blue Sky is like Twitter, but for liberals, and so I'm going to let things calm down over there before I probably get too engaged in Blue Sky, but it's at Rep Jam.
Okay. No, that sounds good. And I don't know if some of my progressive young people who watch the podcast will like what you said, but I thoroughly did, and I have another audience that will like what you said. So I appreciate your time, Mr. Miller. And
I appreciate your time, and thank
I
you for being
enjoyed this.
welcoming, and I really do appreciate the olive branch that hopefully we can continue to hand to each other when it comes to these things. And where we can agree, let's make good things happen, and where we can't, let's have reasonable arguments.
Well, there you go. That's right.
I think the cornerstone of this is with the American people so divided, it's important to have discussions on both sides. Please leave your comments and subscribe if you feel like it. Thank you. Bye.